Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're working on this PathWinder go-kart. This machine was made in the mid-90s, and unfortunately I don't know a whole lot about it. I've never seen one like it before. My friend Jason actually came across this in his travels. Someone had thrown it out, so he offered it up to me, and of course I accepted. He did send me one picture. The picture I don't think did this justice. It looked pretty bad. And now that it's here, I've kind of changed my mind on it, at least as far as the frame goes. I mean, there is rust, but it's perfectly straight. There's no rot. So it has good bones. It'll definitely clean up really well. And I was also excited to see what engine was on here. This is a 5-horse Briggs flathead branded Fun Power. And this is the exact same engine that's on my Dingo go-kart, and a really nice engine. But that excitement was short-lived because as soon as he dropped it off, I saw the starter recoil was missing. It's actually sitting over here. And I grabbed the starter cup and tried to rotate the engine. And unfortunately, it's locked up solid. So did it run out of oil? Maybe. But whether it ran out of oil or not, it almost doesn't matter because someone took the spark plug out and this machine was left out in the rain. So the engine definitely has water in it. I'm sure it's locked up for that reason alone, but there could be multiple issues going on here. So, I think we need to start with the engine. That is going to be the main focus today. I need to get it up and running or make the determination to scrap it and replace it with something else. So let me get you set up a little bit better and get going on this. I'm actually going to start by draining the oil. That should give us a lot of insight as to what we're dealing with here. And I'm actually willing to bet it ran out of oil before filling with water. I say that because the oil fill on the other side is nearly impossible to get to, and the oil drain is equally difficult. So this, in this configuration, would have been hard to maintain. And the only thing coming out so far is water. Not a good sign. It's been 10 minutes, and the only thing we've got is water, and it's kind of winding down. So, yeah, unfortunately, I think this engine locked due to a lack of oil, and then, of course, filled with water once someone pulled the plug out. So that's the oil fill right there that I was talking about, and that's also how you would check the oil. So, yeah, not very user-friendly, but I am going to remove this plug in case there's a vacuum, and look at that. Now we're coming out nice and fast, so we'll give it a few more minutes. There's hope yet. This gives me a little bit of hope. The engine was not out of oil. It's hard to judge exactly how much oil was in there, but I think it was enough that the engine would not have locked due to a lack of oil. And I'm kind of wondering now, given the volume of fluid that came out, potentially the piston was hydrolocked from the bottom. So I'm going to put a little bit of PB Blaster down in the cylinder. We'll get a wrench on the flywheel nut, and we'll try to rotate this engine. That cylinder, I think, is full of water. It didn't take much PB Blaster, and it just came right out. So it's pretty much a guarantee we're going to have to take this engine apart, but let's give it a try, see if it moves. right, let's give this a try. Ah, look at that. It does move. It's very crunchy though. So I'm actually not gonna force it. I'm gonna get the head off instead. I wanna clean up all the junk in there first. We'll lubricate it real well, and then we'll try to make a full revolution. To get the head off, I need to get this front cooling tin off. And to get that off, I probably need to remove the tank, the carburetor, and the airbox. So I'm gonna start there. And actually, we should take a peek in the tank as well. I don't smell any bad fuel, but the fact that the cap won't budge is not a good sign. It's really hard to get in here and show you, but I think you can see on the right side that is clean metal on the sides of the tank. And the bottom of the tank, yeah, there's a bit of rust, a bit of debris, but not too bad. This tank will definitely clean up and be usable again. Ooh, that filter looks terrible. And it's wet. So water was getting in, I would say, through the airbox as well. Wow, that is stuck. Yeah, it's bad. What do you think? Do we need a new air filter? I'd say that's the least of our problems. All right, we got two out. These two are fighting me, so I think I'm going to shock them a bit, apply a bit of heat, and try again. Got it. Choke is completely rusted in place. Throttle plate's also stuck, which presents a problem because the next screw I need is kind of under that throttle plate. It needs to rotate out of the way. That one's going to be a challenge. The surprises continue, but the carb is, well, full of water, for one. For two, I went to disconnect the governor rod from the governor arm, and the governor arm no longer there. We still have the governor shaft, so, I don't think someone did a complete delete, but they definitely removed the arm, essentially bypassing the governor. And if you look at the intake, that is just full of mud. So, yeah, I think there's going to be a lot more of that inside the engine. I'm just realizing too, the exhaust is pointing straight up, so even if the spark plug was in, would not have mattered a whole lot. Anyway, just a few bolts left, and we get to see how bad it is. am I greeted by water. Yep. It's bad. And it's that deep. Not good. Yeah, the bore surprisingly isn't as bad as I imagined. So I'm thinking this is not a cast iron sleeve. Otherwise, this would be rusted up pretty bad. So the bore, I would say, is aluminum and could be cleaned up fairly easily, I think with some WD-40 and some Scotch-Brite. The valves, well, that's another story. Those are rusted and I'm assuming stuck. So we'll lube those up real well. We'll try to rotate the engine and see how far we get. Turning the engine backwards. Seems to be moving fine. Of course, the intake is stuck open. So I'm thinking this is the intake stroke. Combustion stroke. And now it should be the exhaust stroke. And that valve should be opening. And it's not. And the engine won't rotate. So that valve is stuck. So I'm going to give it a little bit of heat. See if that makes any kind of a difference. The good news is the valve opened. But it's not closing, at least not on its own. So potentially if I keep working at it, it might get a little better. Actually, I think the exhaust will get a lot better. The intake, though, I'm not so optimistic about. It's heavily rusted. So I think the plan here is just to free these up as much as I can, and then we need to open up the block, get the valves out, and just fully assess the damage. think it just went down. Just going to pull the exhaust off. I think there is water in that exhaust port. So I've already got the bolt off on the other side. Oh yeah, that's the good stuff. I guess we'll keep going. Let's take that valve cover off, see if that's full of water. Yeah, a little bit of rust in there, but it's not terrible. You know, I think that could be cleaned up. So it's the next day. I've been working at this for a while. My son is helping me free these valves up. The exhaust is almost closing on its own. And the intake, not quite closing yet, but it's getting a lot easier. Hit the intake. Yeah, a lot easier. Hit the intake. Oh, it closed on its own. Hit the exhaust. Intake's moving. Exhaust. Things are looking up. Yeah, I wouldn't say they're making a good seal, but at least they're closing. And that also means we can get them out and clean up the valve stems properly. Intake. Just going to add a bit of oil back to the block. I want to rotate the engine at high speed, and I don't want to hurt the engine any more than it already is. Plus, it should help flush out some of the water that's left in there. Is that water coming out of the intake? Watch right there. I've been working at this for a while and definitely making a lot of progress. We're at the point now where the valve springs can consistently close the valves. I wouldn't say they feel great. There's still a lot of resistance getting them to open, and they're certainly not sealing, but I think we're at the point now where I can try to uninstall these valves from the head. So before I do that, I actually want to get the roll cage out of the way. There's a bolt in each corner holding it in place. With that removed, it'll just be a lot easier to kind of do what we need to do. And while we're at it, I'm going to get this chain guard off as well. All right, sorry you missed it, but I just released both of the retainers on the valves. So theoretically, the valves are free to come out, assuming we can get the valve stem through, which is going to be the challenge. And no, it's getting pretty tight. So let's push that back in. We'll get a little bit more PB Blaster on and try it again. There's one. Valve stem doesn't look too bad. And the face isn't bad either. It's not pitted. So I think the exhaust valve can clean up. Let's try the intake. And the stem isn't bad, but you can see there is a lot of corrosion right here. And a ton on the underside. So, yeah, the intake valve, I think, should be replaced for sure. Yeah, it's getting kind of thin right there. Anyway, let's clean up these seats a little bit, see what we have to work with there. Yeah, that intake seat, it's in rough shape. It's not looking good. The exhaust valve seat actually doesn't look that bad. I think it could be cleaned up and be made to work. The intake seat, though, it's pretty bad. There is a lot of corrosion, a lot of distortion, especially on the far side of the seat. So I don't think that's ever going to seal again, at least not like that. And of course the valve, it's in pretty bad shape. A lot of pitting, a lot of corrosion, and the valve stem, quite a bit has actually worn away right there. So yeah, the intake valve and the intake seat, not looking so good. Anyway, I think we're at the point where we can get this engine opened up. So I'm going to get all the engine mounting bolts out, which will free the engine. We'll bring this over to the bench, try to get the clutch off, and assuming we can get that done, we will get the sump opened up and see what awaits us inside. That came off surprisingly easy. I believe this should just slide off as one unit. And, you know, potentially we can get this outer drum off separately, although I'm not sure that's going to help us. I believe there is a set screw right there. It looks pretty crusty, pretty hard for you to see, but let me see if I can crack that loose. And with any luck, that'll free this up. Not good. The bit just broke. Thankfully I didn't strip anything out, but we do have a bit where it doesn't belong. But that came out. Alright, let's try this again. Now, I'm not sure that set screw is going to come out. Yeah, I'm just going to break this Allen wrench. It's flexing quite a bit. So I'm going to apply a bit of heat. You know, usually I don't like doing that because it's going to destroy the seal. But honestly, at this point, you know, I'm not sure this engine is rebuildable. And even if it is, I was going to replace that seal anyway. keep melting my tool. Fortunately, the set screw hasn't budged, and this was the last one I had that kind of fit. So I think I'm going to have to wait till the morning, make a trip to the store, and get another bit I can put in the impact. Alright, I'm going to get one more chance at this. I did find another bit that seems to fit in there pretty tight. So I'm going to try this again on the medium setting. It's spinning. Got it. So that was the easy part. I think getting this off the shaft is going to be the hard part. You know, I'm not trying to save this clutch. Most likely I'm going to replace this with a torque converter. And most likely going to replace the whole engine. So I could try a puller and a bit of heat. Yeah, it's starting to come off. Yeah, to be honest, it's not terrible. I mean, this cover here would clean up perfectly. The governor weights actually seem to be in good shape. They move freely, and they are free from rust. Camshaft journals look pretty good. The lobes look pretty good as well. The gear does have some rust on it, but that actually would clean up without a whole lot of effort. You know, as far as the rest of it goes, the crankshaft I'd say is the worst as far as rust goes, especially the back here. There is a ton of rust. We have the lifters right here. This is the exhaust lifter, and that one is stuck. That should just slide right out, so that is definitely not a good sign. We have the intake lifter back there, and that one does move a little bit, but it is extremely crunchy. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to get the crankshaft out. I want to take a look at the main journal. Before I do that, though, I do need to get the flywheel off. So I'm actually going to put this end cover back on just to offer some support so that when we shock the flywheel, we don't cause any additional damage to this engine. No surprises on the crankshaft. Main journal is pretty clean. I don't see any gouges, no scratches, no rust. So the crankshaft actually could be reused. You know, I think the biggest issue is just the rust on the counterweights. That would have to be thoroughly cleaned off. You know, you don't want any of this abrasive essentially floating around in the engine, or it is going to make quick work of the engine. You know, as far as the connecting rod goes, you know, the cap looks pretty good, so no concerns there. Same on the big end of the connecting rod. You know, it looks pretty good. So I would say the connecting rod is good, and the piston also looks pretty good. You know, a few minor vertical scratches, but, you know, it actually looks almost like new. The piston rings, though, that is a different story. We have 3 rings, and every single one of them is stuck. So like that, likely you wouldn't build compression. And even if you did, this would be smoking like a freight train because the oil would not get properly scraped back into the engine. So the rings, definitely no good. That might keep the engine from running. And of course, the damage to the valves and the valve seats definitely would keep this engine from running. So it's late at night. I'm going to give this one some thought, maybe do up a list of what this would need. But yeah, I'm thinking, as much as I like these engines, this one, I think it's a parts machine. Well, I think the decision's been made. This engine I actually pulled off my son's Coleman KT196 about half a year ago. It was a good running engine. The only reason we pulled it off was because we wanted to upgrade to one with slightly more power, a charging system, and electric start. This engine's been running well. That said, though, this one's been on a shelf for a while, and there's been a few changes to it since it last ran. There is a brand new crankshaft in it, and I also swapped out the pilot jet with that of a generator that was surging. So likely this engine might have a small surge, but that is an easy fix. And this engine is way better than that 5-horse Briggs. I actually priced out the parts needed to bring that engine back to good health. The parts cost alone is about $400. So yeah, as much as I like those engines, it's not worth that much money. If I wanted to keep this a Briggs engine on this go-kart, the best bet would be to buy a used one. I took a look on Facebook and actually found a leaf blower that had a 5-horse Briggs flathead on it for $40. Anyway, I have this engine. It's actually more powerful than the Briggs, and I know it's in good shape. So I do want to use it, and I want to take this opportunity to actually do a few upgrades to this machine. The Briggs just had a clutch. I want to put a torque converter on there, and that is going to cause a few problems because with the torque converter setup, I actually need to elevate this engine a bit and move the sprocket over closer to the engine by about 2 inches. And of course, it's rusted in place. And even if it wasn't, the brake drum is attached to the sprocket. The brake drum actually has to stay right there. So the drum has to be swapped out. Likely the bearings need to be swapped out. These wheels are pretty dry rot and need to be swapped out. So I'm thinking we should just pull the entire axle with everything on it and just put all new stuff in its place. So I'm actually going to break this video into 2. I've got to order a bunch of parts. So next week we will pick up where we left off and hopefully get this thing up and running and driving. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.